My name is Valerie Vance. I'm 30 years old, and for 2 years I had managed to convince myself that silence was the same thing as peace. It wasn't until I was standing on a stone patio overlooking the Hollywood Hills, holding a glass of champagne I never ordered, that I understood how wrong I'd been. I run Vance Premier Events, a boutique firm that handles private estate functions for people whose names you'd recognize from tech earnings calls. Last year alone, I coordinated 41 events with a combined budget north of $6 million. I know vendors. I know contracts. I know exactly how much a Magnum of 2015 Dom Perignon costs wholesale versus retail, and I know it because I've negotiated that exact bottle into client packages a dozen times. I tell you this not to brag, but because it matters later. Everything about my job mattered later. 2 years ago, I stopped speaking to my family. Not in a dramatic, slam-door way, in the quiet, surgical way you end something that's been bleeding you out slowly. My younger brother Julian wrapped his Audi around a guardrail on Mulholland with no insurance, and a blood alcohol level the police report described as significantly elevated. The private lender who'd financed the car came after my parents. My parents came after me. You make more in a month than your father makes in a year, my mother told me on the phone that February, her voice cracking on cue. Family helps family, Valerie. I said no. I said it once, calmly, and then I stopped answering calls. So when my mother's name lit up my phone 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was walking a wine vendor through a tasting menu in Malibu, I almost didn't pick up. I should have trusted that instinct. Valerie. Beatrice Vance's voice was thin, trembling, exactly the register she uses when she wants something. It's your father. The doctors found something on his scans. They're not optimistic. I stood very still in the middle of that tasting room, a glass of Sancerre halfway to my mouth, and felt the floor tilt the way it always does when my mother says something designed to make me feel like the worst daughter alive. What kind of something? He doesn't want to talk about it over the phone. He wants to see you. One dinner, Valerie. Quiet, just us before, she didn't finish the sentence. She never finishes the sentences that are supposed to do the most damage. She lets the silence do it for her. I told myself I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for the 11-year-old girl who used to sit on my father's shoulders at the Santa Monica Pier, before he turned into a man who measured love in dollar signs. I wanted to believe that version of him still existed somewhere, buried under the failed real estate deals and the country club dues he couldn't afford. My mother sent me an address 2 days later, not our family home in Sherman Oaks, but a private rental estate in Bel Air, gated, 6 bedrooms, the kind of property I personally book for clients who pay $40,000 a night. Your father wanted somewhere peaceful, she'd written. Somewhere special. For us. I should have asked who was paying for somewhere special. I didn't. That's mistake number 1, and I own it. I arrived Saturday evening in a black dress I'd worn to a Netflix executive's birthday the month before, carrying a bottle of wine I'd chosen myself, expecting for place settings, and an uncomfortable conversation about mortality. Instead, I walked through wrought iron gates into a scene that stopped me cold. String lights threaded through olive trees. A 12-piece string quartet played near the infinity pool. At least 20 people I half recognized, second cousins, my father's old country club crowd, a man I was fairly certain managed money for someone on the Forbes list, stood scattered across a stone patio holding champagne flutes, laughing too loud, the way people laugh when they're performing wealth for each other. 3 long tables ran the length of the patio, draped in white linen, anchored by towers of king crab legs and a caviar station with mother-of-pearl spoons. A chef I knew personally, Sterling Cho, whose private catering company I had referred to 4 separate billionaire clients over the past 3 years, was plating A5 wagyu at a live cooking station near the pool house. I knew that menu. I had built menus exactly like it. The wagyu alone ran $200 a plate before labor and rentals. My father spotted me before I could process what I was looking at. Arthur Vance crossed the patio in a blazer he definitely couldn't afford, arms open, his face arranged into an expression of warm, fragile gratitude that I'd seen him perform at country club fundraisers 100 times. There she is. His voice carried, deliberately, across the whole patio. My daughter. The one who built an empire out of nothing. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I felt 20 pairs of eyes land on me at once, and underneath the champagne and string quartet, something cold settled into my stomach. Dad. I kept my voice low, steady, the way I do with a client who's about to make a scene in front of their own guests. Mom said this was going to be a quiet dinner. Just us. Plans change. He laughed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cologne and scotch. Over his shoulder, I caught my mother watching us from near the bar, her expression unreadable for exactly 1 second before it dissolved back into practiced warmth. You only get one father, sweetheart. I wanted to celebrate properly. Celebrate what, exactly? He didn't answer that. He guided me by the elbow toward the tables instead, introducing me to people I'd never met as my daughter, the event genius. She does parties for the Bezos crowd, an exaggeration so casual it almost sounded true. I scanned the patio for any sign of illness. No oxygen tank. No careful seating arrangement for a man too weak to stand. Arthur Vance looked exactly like what he was, a 61-year-old man in good health, slightly overweight, 2 drinks in, performing for an audience. I found my brother Julian near the bar, in a fitted navy suit I knew for a fact he couldn't have paid for, scrolling his phone with the particular boredom of someone who'd been told to show up and look presentable. He glanced up at me, gave a tight nod, and went back to his screen. No hug. No good to see you. Just a kid who knew he was part of something, and didn't especially care to explain it. That's when I noticed the man in the navy blazer near the pool house, the one I'd clocked earlier as money, deep in conversation with my father, both of them gesturing at something on a tablet. I caught 3 words drifting across the patio, asterisk fund. Allocation. Returns, asterisk. My stomach tightened further. I found my mother by the dessert table, fussing with a centerpiece that didn't need fixing. Mom. Where's the medical news? You said the doctors weren't optimistic. Not here, Valerie. She glanced past me, scanning the crowd, checking who might be listening. Your father wants to tell everyone together. After dinner. He's been planning this. Planning this, not the diagnosis. The party. I should have left right then. I think some part of me already knew. But I'd spent 2 years being called cold, selfish, ungrateful, and some stubborn, exhausted part of me needed to see exactly how far they'd take it before I let myself believe it. So I stayed. I sat through 3 courses of food I knew the exact cost of, watched my father refill wealthy men's glasses and drop phrases like family office and generational wealth, and felt the shape of the trap closing around me 1 course at a time, long before anyone said the word bill. What I didn't know yet, what none of them at that table understood, was that I'd recognized Sterling Cho's catering badge the moment I walked in, and that recognition was about to change everything about how this night would end. Because before dessert was even served, while my father was toasting his successful daughter taking care of the family legacy, I excused myself to the restroom, ducked into the pool house kitchen instead, and had a 4-minute conversation with Chef Sterling that my father had no idea was happening. I had no idea yet how big that invoice would be. I had no idea my father had already used his business credit card to secure the booking. I just knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had not authorized a single dollar of this event, and by the time the check arrived, my father was going to learn exactly what that meant. The kitchen behind the pool house smelled like seared butter and crushed thyme, and for 4 minutes it became the only honest room on that entire property. Sterling Cho looked up from a tray of microgreens when I pushed through the service door, and his face did something I hadn't expected, relief. Valerie. He set down his tweezers, wiped his hands on his apron. I wondered if you knew. Knew what? That you were the client. He pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward me. A booking confirmation, dated 9 days earlier. Estate rental, full-service catering, 22 guests, premium tier. The contact name listed wasn't mine. It was my father's. But the note field, added by whoever processed the booking, read, "Daughter is event industry professional. Handle discreetly, avoid confusion." My stomach dropped somewhere near my shoes. "He told my office manager you'd referred him," Sterling said. "Said you two were planning a surprise reconciliation dinner together. We get referral bookings from you 4-5 times a year." Nobody flagged it. I felt something close to admiration underneath the fury. It was a good lie. Clean, plausible, low risk. My father had used my reputation as collateral without my knowledge, the same way he'd used my name to introduce me to strangers an hour earlier. "Sterling, I need you to listen to me carefully. I kept my voice at the register I use with nervous clients an hour before a wedding goes sideways. I did not authorize this event. I'm not paying for this event. Whatever card secured this booking, that's the only card that's getting charged tonight. Not mine. Not under any circumstances." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "There's already a card on file. Mr. Vance's business account. We require it to hold the booking, standard policy for estate rentals over $15,000. Good. Then nothing changes on your end. You run the event exactly the way it's contracted. When the final invoice comes, you present it the way you always do, to the account holder. Not to me. I want that explicitly clear, in front of whoever's at that table." Sterling studied me for a second, and I watched him connect the pieces the way smart people do when they've spent enough time around wealthy families behaving badly. "This isn't a reconciliation dinner." "No," I said. "It's a performance, and I just figured out who the audience is for." He nodded once, the kind of nod you give someone you trust completely. "Cards already authorized for full payment on closeout. I'll present it correctly. You have my word." I thanked him and slipped back out through the side path, rejoining the patio just as the second course was being cleared. Nobody seemed to have noticed I was gone. That told me something too. Nobody at that party was actually watching me. I was a prop, not a guest. I found a seat near the end of the table, beside a cousin named Renata I hadn't spoken to since a funeral 6 years earlier, and I listened. That's when I started hearing the real conversation underneath the party, the one happening in fragments, in low voices, between my father and the man in the navy blazer. His name was Donald Wexler. Country club acquaintance, my mother mentioned later, though the way he and my father spoke suggested something closer to a business relationship hanging by a thread. I caught pieces. Phase 2 funding. Q1 distribution. Your daughter's industry, real growth potential. At one point my father gestured toward me with his wine glass, mid-sentence, the way you'd gesture at a piece of evidence. I excused myself again, this time to find Julian. He was sitting alone at the edge of the pool, jacket off, tie loosened, looking less like a guest of honor and more like a man waiting out a sentence. I sat down beside him. "You want to tell me what's actually happening tonight?" He didn't look at me. "Dad's broke, Val. Like, actually broke. The real estate fund collapsed in March. He's been bridging it with credit lines for months." He picked at a loose thread on his cuff. "Wexler and his friends, they're old money. Dad needs them to believe the Vance name still means something. That's what tonight is. And you?" A long pause. "I owe Marchetti $11,000. The guy who financed the Audi. He's not exactly the patient type." Julian finally looked at me, and for one unguarded second I saw something that might have been shame. I figured if I just showed up and smiled, maybe it'd buy me a little room. Maybe Dad's investors thing works out, maybe there's something left over for me. And if it doesn't work out? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I walked back toward the tables as Sterling's staff began clearing for dessert, and I understood now what I was looking at with total clarity. This wasn't a health scare. This wasn't reconciliation. This was a financial production with 3 acts, convince Valerie to attend using guilt, convince Wexler's circle the Vance family was thriving using Valerie's career as proof, and somewhere in the third act, hand someone the bill. I just hadn't figured out yet whose name they planned to put on it. I assumed, foolishly, that it would be implied rather than spoken, a quiet expectation that I'd help out, the way I always used to. I underestimated how direct my father was willing to be in front of an audience. As the dessert plates came out, a deconstructed tiramisu Sterling's kitchen does beautifully, candied espresso beans and all, my father rose from his seat, at the head of the table, tapped his fork against his glass, and the entire patio went quiet. I want to say something, he announced, scanning the faces around him like a man closing a deal. 2 years ago, my family went through something difficult. Tonight, my daughter Valerie proved that no matter what happens, the Vance family takes care of its own. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, glasses raised, waiting. I smiled the way you smile when you're 3 moves ahead of someone who thinks they're the one playing chess. Because I'd already seen Sterling's staff begin setting up the closeout terminal near the bar, and I knew exactly what was coming next, and exactly whose card was about to find out the truth in front of everyone Arthur Vance had spent the entire night trying to impress. The applause died down, and my father sat back into his chair with the satisfied look of a man who believed he'd just closed the deal of his life. Wexler leaned toward him, murmuring something I couldn't hear, and my father nodded like a man already counting money that wasn't his. I didn't smile back at the table. I just waited. Sterling appeared at the edge of the patio a few minutes later, flanked by 2 men in dark estate security polos, standard protocol for high-value rental properties, the kind of detail I'd specifically requested for clients managing difficult guests in the past. He carried a slim leather billfold, the kind every luxury caterer uses for closeout, and he walked the length of the table with the calm, unhurried pace of someone who has done this 1,000 times, and knows exactly how the next 60 seconds will go. He stopped at the head of the table. Not beside me. Beside my father. Mr. Vance. If I could have a moment for closeout. Conversation rippled into silence. 20 guests, mid-dessert, all turned to watch. My father opened the billfold with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once had to look at the bottom line of a check in front of people he wanted to impress. I watched his eyes find the number. $4, 127.00. His jaw tightened for half a second before he recovered. Then, smoothly, theatrically, he slid the billfold down the table toward me, past the cousins, past Wexler, past the cooling crab legs, until it landed in front of my plate. We know how well you're doing, Valerie. His voice carried, pitched for the whole patio, the same performance register he'd used for the toast. Keep it on your corporate account. Consider it a small thank you for everything we did raising you. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled around the table. Wexler watched closely, calculating, the way men like him always do when money changes hands. I looked down at the invoice. Then I looked up at my father, and I let 3 full seconds of silence sit there before I spoke, because silence is the most underused tool in any negotiation. I didn't order this event. I slid the billfold back across the linen, not hard, just deliberate. I never signed a booking contract, I never authorized a deposit, and as the person who runs an events company for a living, I can tell you with certainty, I would never authorize 5-figure catering without paperwork. This isn't my bill, Dad. His smile flickered. Don't embarrass yourself in front of our guests. I'm not the one who should be worried about that. Sterling cleared his throat, polite but unmoved by the tension building around him. Mr. Vance, the booking contract is under your name. Your business card was used to secure the venue and catering 9 days ago, standard policy for estate rentals over $15,000. Per the terms you signed, the card on file is automatically charged at closeout if the balance isn't settled in person. That's a mistake, my father said too quickly. There's a limit on that card. Run it again tomorrow, we'll sort the details. The terms don't allow for deferred payment, sir. Sterling's voice stayed even, professional, the tone of a man who'd clearly had this exact conversation before with clients who thought charm could substitute for funds. The card was already processed 3 minutes ago, prior to dessert service, per our standard closeout window. My father's phone buzzed on the table. Then buzzed again. He didn't reach for it right away. I think some part of him already knew. When he finally turned it over, I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. An overdraft alert, bold red text visible even from where I sat. Beneath it, a second notification, a declined transaction from earlier that evening, the valet company he'd hired for guest parking. Wexler leaned over without meaning to hide it, glanced at the screen, and sat back slowly in his chair. I watched him recalculate everything he'd believed about the men sitting across from him for the past 2 hours. Arthur. His voice had lost all its earlier warmth. Is there a problem with the account? No, it's a banking error, the system flagged. It's not an error, I said quietly, and the whole table heard it. I work in this industry. I know exactly what an overdrawn business account looks like, because I've watched clients try to cover it up before. This isn't a glitch, Dad. This is the truth catching up with the story you told everyone tonight. My mother's hand found my father's wrist under the table, gripping hard, her smile collapsing into something brittle and furious. Julian had gone very still, staring at his plate like he wanted to disappear into it. Wexler stood first. Quiet, controlled, the way money always exits a room that's just turned into a liability. I think we'll head out. Arthur, we'll talk Monday. 2 other guests rose right behind him, murmuring excuses, the kind of polite retreat that happens when wealthy people realize they've been standing next to someone pretending to be one of them. Within 4 minutes, half the patio had emptied. My father sat frozen at the head of the table, the overdraft notification still glowing on the screen in front of him, his country club audience walking past him toward the gate without a single backward glance. The man who'd spent the whole evening building a story about generational wealth and family loyalty was left holding nothing but a declined valet receipt, and a daughter who hadn't moved from her seat. You did this, he said finally, low, venom replacing charm. You humiliated me in front of everyone. No. I stood, smoothing my dress, picking up my purse from the back of the chair. You did this 9 days ago, when you used my name and my reputation to book an event you couldn't afford, in front of people you were trying to scam into a failing real estate fund. I just refused to clean it up for you. My mother opened her mouth, some new performance forming, I could see it loading behind her eyes, but I held up a hand before she could start. Don't, Mom. Not tonight. I turned to Sterling, who was already directing his staff to begin breaking down the dessert station, professional and unbothered, like watching a family implode in real time was simply Tuesday for him. Thank you for handling that exactly the way we discussed. Anytime, Valerie. A small, genuine smile. Your account's never been safer with me than it was tonight. I walked across the patio, past the string quartet packing up their instruments, past the caviar station already half disassembled, past Julian, who said nothing, and out through the wrought iron gates into the cool dark of the hills. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly what was happening behind me. A family finally facing a bill they'd spent 2 years trying to hand someone else, with no one left at the table willing to cover it. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached my car. 7 missed calls from my mother in 11 minutes. 2 voicemails from a number I didn't recognize, Arthur's new burner, I'd learn later, after his primary line got disconnected for non-payment. A single text from Julian that just said, *, can we talk? Not about money. Promise, *. I drove home without answering any of them, windows down, the cold canyon air doing more to settle my pulse than anything else could have. By the time I pulled into my garage in Culver City, I had a clearer head than I'd had in 2 years. The first real information came 3 days later, not from my family, but from an industry contact, a woman named Priya who runs estate bookings for the same rental company Sterling had used that night. We weren't close, but in this business, reputations move faster than gossip ever could. Your father's name is flagged across for rental platforms now, she told me over coffee, half out of professional courtesy, half because she knew I'd want to hear it from someone steady rather than from him. The overdraft triggered a fraud review on the card. Turns out it wasn't just maxed, it was already past due on 2 other accounts. Estate companies talk, Valerie. Words out. I learned the rest in pieces over the following 2 weeks, the way you learn the true shape of a storm after it's already passed. Wexler, it turned out, hadn't just walked away from the dinner, he'd walked away from the entire fund. He'd been close to wiring a 6-figure investment into my father's failing real estate venture, contingent on exactly the kind of financial credibility that dinner was designed to manufacture. The overdraft alert, witnessed by 3 other country club members at that table, ended any chance of that money ever materializing. Within a month, the fund formally dissolved. My father's business partner, a man I'd met twice at Christmas years earlier, filed paperwork distancing himself entirely. Julian called again, for days after the dinner, and this time I picked up. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said immediately, before I could even say hello. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I knew what that dinner was. I sat there and let it happen because I thought it might help me too." A pause, static and breathing. "It didn't. Marchetti's lawyer sent a letter yesterday. I'm filing for a payment plan on my own. No more asking you. No more asking anyone. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even close to enough to undo 2 years of being treated like a wallet with a pulse. But it was the first honest sentence my brother had said to me in longer than I could remember, and I let myself believe it might mean something eventually, even if it didn't mean everything yet." My mother never apologized. She called twice more, the tone shifting each time, wounded, then accusing, then finally cold, informing me that "this family will remember how you behaved when your father needed you." I let both calls go to voicemail and didn't listen to either one all the way through. The last piece of the story reached me almost a month later, through Sterling, who'd heard it secondhand from a vendor at the property management company that owned the Bel Air estate. My father had tried to book another event 2 weeks after the dinner, smaller this time, a business lunch at a different rental property, no card required up front if he could provide a cosigner. He'd listed me as a reference. The property manager called my office to confirm. I told them, politely and clearly, that I had no professional or financial relationship with Arthur Vance, and that any booking using my name without my consent should be treated as fraudulent. The lunch never happened. As far as I know, Northwest Luxury Estate in 3 counties has taken a booking from him since. I think about that dinner sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of clarity I didn't have access to for most of my life. My father spent decades believing that appearances were the same thing as substance, that if enough wealthy people watched him perform generosity, the performance would eventually become true. He used me as his proof for so long that I stopped noticing I was being used at all. It took one $4,127 invoice, presented in front of the exact audience he'd built his entire identity around, to show everyone at that table, including me, what was actually underneath the performance. I changed my number 2 weeks later. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I kept Julian's for now because he'd earned that much. I didn't keep my parents'. These days, when I walk into an estate booking, caviar stations, string quartets, clients who measure success in square footage, I still think about Chef Sterling standing at the head of that table, calm and unbothered, simply doing his job correctly while an entire performance collapsed around him. That's the version of professionalism I try to carry into every event I run now. Do the job right. Follow the contract. Let the truth present itself because eventually, it always does, usually right when the bill arrives.